And so I want to end my remarks on another hotspot that exploded a few days ago, and that's Afghanistan. And why do I link those two? Because I started with a story of how an American concept worked with its allies of how to organize an international system that would be prosperous and peaceful. How that took a great deal of confidence, even a great deal of bravery on the part of the United States to do those things at that time. And when you watch images of the United States of America essentially giving up on an ally, people hanging on to American transports, the American armed forces leaving massive amounts of equipment behind, not to mention a military base that was in the center of one of the world's most troubled regions. What it does is to erode credibility. And credibility is not divisible. If you're not credible in Afghanistan, you're not credible on Taiwan. If you're not credible in Afghanistan, you're not credible on Ukraine. If you're not credible in Afghanistan, you're not credible on Iraq. And so now, in the context of these new challenges, the United States has an additional problem to try to rebuild credibility. Now, I was a part of an administration for whom credibility was an issue. I will tell you a little story. Maybe we overdid it a bit on the credibility thing. I remember when I was getting ready to do some negotiations with the North Koreans, and in a national security meeting, the vice president, who, as he said, didn't much like diplomacy, he would always kind of joke about it, but he said, "Oh, Mr. President," he said, "we can't do this. We have to maintain our credibility on the use of force." I said, "Mr. President, the one problem the Bush administration does not have is credibility on the use of force. People think we will use force if they look at us the wrong way. So we don't have that problem. We now have the flip side of that problem." And so when you think about what we've been looking at over the last few days, think about the further erosion of that system. Think about the fact that American global power has always been maintained by keeping threats out there. And when the threat came here and attacked us, we recognized that we needed to push it back out there again. And so as we watch what the Afghans have and have not achieved, one of the things to remember is we used their territory, not just to try to help them educate women. That was a great thing. Not just to give them a chance at a democratic government. That was a great thing. We used their territory for our own counterterrorism purposes. I'll end with just a story about why Bagram Air Base was so important. At the beginning of, on the days after 9/11, we recognized that we were going to war in Afghanistan. And I remember looking at the map. There was a big map rolled out on the table at Camp David that Saturday morning. And I remember looking at that map and thinking, not Afghanistan. That's where great powers go to die. Britain, the Soviet Union, not Afghanistan. And then kind of steeling myself and saying, I guess it's Afghanistan. Because that was where Al-Qaeda trained and equipped. When I first flew into Afghanistan, I remember flying over the high mountains and thinking, these people have nothing but high mountains and dirt. This is an awful place to have to fight. But we knew we were going to have to fight. And by using that territory, we took the time to develop a counterterrorism presence across the world, in places like East Africa, for instance. We took the time to transition our military from one that was arrayed against great powers to one that fought seamlessly between intelligence, diplomacy, and military power. We also used that time to build a counterterrorism capability at home. You remember I said that the FBI and the CIA couldn't talk to one another. Well, now the National Counterterrorism Center is the place where all of those assets to come together. We used that time on their territory, with them doing a bulk of the fighting, to build and remake our capacity to keep us safe at home. And why Bagram Air Force Base would have been so important. On that Saturday morning, we got a report, of course, from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And he said, Mr. President, the problem is we have no place from which to fly close air support. We knew that we weren't going to use a lot of our military forces on the ground. In fact, what we were going to do was to use Afghan fighters supported by the CIA and supported by American military power, American air power. And there are lots of pictures of these men on horsebacks and donkeys with American air cover over them. In fact, the Russians were really helpful. They were going to supply the Northern Alliance. And at one point, the president said, the Russians are being slow. They're slow. Call Sergei Ivanov, who was defense minister, and find out. He said, we're trying. It's not easy to find donkeys. I said, what? He said, well, that's what they're asking for, donkeys. So, our air power and those donkeys. But we needed bases for that close air support. And so we had to go beg and borrow from a dictator named Karimov in Uzbekistan to let us use his bases for that close air support. And he got a king's ransom. We made Uzbekistan really rich to get those assets. It just shows why sometimes you have to recognize that assets that are deployed abroad, assets that make up for the enormous distances that the United States would have to cover in order to support counterterrorism operations, was something we also got from the Afghan people. And so managing hotspots now, whether it is Iran or Iraq or others, I think will be tougher, but that's what we do. Hopefully, as we manage those hotspots, we'll also begin to rebuild a semblance of an international system in which the United States has a view of how it ought to unfold and is ready to protect it. Thank you very much, and I'm ready to take any questions.